What is up, guys, and welcome back to part 2 of the series Diet Myths and What We Really Know About Nutrition. Today I want to talk about diet myths surrounding the macronutrient fat. I personally found it very interesting what studies could prove and what they cannot. As last time, this part of the series is based on Timothy Spector's book Diet Myths. Diet Myths. Fat makes up around 1/3 of our bodies, and without it we could not survive. Fats are not soluble in water nor in blood and are produced in our liver and distributed via the bloodstream in connection with a protein. Fat is an important macronutrient and comes in different forms. There are saturated, unsaturated, and trans fats. And all these fats have different impacts on our health and weight. For example, it was always believed that omega-3 fatty acids that can be found in fish are very beneficial for us. My mom actually went out and bought capsules for us as kids to swallow. Omega-3 was thought to be helpful with illnesses like dementia and arthritis. A similar fatty acid called omega-6, however, was thought to be harmful for our cardiovascular system. All this was based on weak observational studies. In fact, a big international study showed that omega-6 is actually better for our hearts than omega-3. Overall spoken, both fats are good for us, and the hype around omega-3 was used to make some money with supplements like the ones my mom bought. Another widely spread myth is that coconut oil is especially good for you. All these websites praise coconut oil, but there is not one study that proves the claimed health benefits. Another superfood that is used to raid your wallets. Next, we're going to talk about different kinds of fat and how they can be beneficial or harmful for your health. First up, saturated fats. There is something called the French paradox. French people eat way more saturated fats than, for example, Brits, but only have 1/3 of the heart diseases, and they live 4 years longer than the Americans. What is it that gives the French this advantage? Is it the red wine, or the cheese and yogurt, or the long talks over dinner about politics, or maybe just that they admire food and treasure sitting with their families around the dinner table? It might also have something to do with the choice of food. They basically eat food full of life, microorganisms that live in cheese, yogurt, and wine. If you have high cholesterol, your doctor probably told you to reduce your cheese intake. Cheese usually consists out of 30 to 40% fat, and most of the fat is saturated fat. People in France, however, eat 26 kilograms of cheese per person and year, which is almost double of what the Americans and Brits eat. The difference is that the most cheese you buy in France is real cheese. 4 of the 10 most sold cheese in France are made from unpasteurized milk. According to the French, it gives the cheese more flavor and body. This also leads the cheese to have a variety of bacteria, fungus, and yeast that live inside the cheese. The more manual the cheese manufacturing is, the less sterile it becomes, which leads to a bigger variety of microorganisms in the cheese that will give it its flavor and texture. And even though this sounds kind of unhygienic, food poisoning from cheese is very, very rare. It is believed that the variety and diversity of microorganisms in the cheese will help us keep a broad variety and diversity of microorganisms in our guts. It's funny that the FDA actually considered the bacteria in the cheese a public health risk and banned a handful of cheese that are manually manufactured in favor of the sterile and industrial production of clean cheese. Earlier, we talked about that calories are not calories, which means a calorie can actually carry a different value depending where it's coming from. The same goes for saturated fats. A study with 49 people demonstrated that. They fed half of the group 13% more calories in form of cheese, and the other half 13% more calories in form of butter. Other than the butter group, the cheese group did not show high blood fat levels or elevated cholesterol levels. Not all saturated fats are the same. So it's safe to say that raw milk cheese and not highly processed cheese is beneficial for our hearts and overall health. Fun fact, it is possible to personalize your cheese. Just take the bacteria from either under your arms, your belly button, or from in between your toes and mix them with milk. These bacteria are very similar to the ones that are actually used for cheese production. Christina Agapakis of the University of California did this exact thing for an art project and even tried her personalized belly button cheese and said it tasted like normal mild cheese. Yogurt is another source of saturated fats, and even though it is also high in calories, it could actually help us lose weight. A study with 2 groups of people showed that the group that was consuming dairy products lost more fat and gained more muscle mass than the group that had the same caloric intake but did not consume any dairy. Other reliable yogurt studies showed that people who consumed full-fat yogurts lost a little bit more weight than people who consumed low-fat or no yogurt. Most yogurts contain a variety of different bacteria that help us break down lactose. Most bacteria in yogurt do not normally live in our guts and therefore are a helpful addition to our microbiome. Another thorough study showed that the consumption of yogurt and its bacteria changes the way we absorb nutrients and promotes anti-inflammatory reaction chains. But before you buy your favorite fruit yogurt, sugar reverses this effect because it inhibits the growth of bacteria. Also, you will have to eat yogurt on the daily to get the positive effect, since most of the bacteria won't even make it to your guts, and if they do, they need to be fed. The colon hosts the second biggest nerve system in our bodies right after our brain. A complex system transfers signals from our brains to our guts and the other way around. This system is responsible for a lot of functions, such as absorbing nutrients, but also affecting our moods. Changes in our gut microbiome affects our neurotransmitters and therefore how we feel. Something I want to talk about is IBS, irritated bowel syndrome, as I suffered from it for years. The cause is unknown, but stress seems to play a big role. Typical symptoms are altered stools, stomach aches, and constipation, and diarrhea. Studies of IBS patients showed abnormalities in their gut microbiome. Especially noticeable was the lack of variety of bacteria. Anxiety and stress harm our microbiome and reduces its variety. And the other way around, probiotics reduced stress and anxiety in mice. So IBS might have to do with stress that reduced the variety of bacteria in our guts, and in a vicious cycle this can lead to even more stress and anxiety. All in all, saturated fat is definitely not the evil demon it was believed it was, and can even have positive effects on our health when consumed in form of cheese and yogurt. Next up, we're talking about unsaturated fats. People with restrictive diets such as vegetarians, pescatarians, or even vegans are healthier in general because they genuinely have to care about what they put in their bodies and not accept all the foods available and eat them. But it's not the foregoing on meat that makes them healthier, but the avoidance of highly processed food that contains high fats and high sugar. It's not about avoiding one boo man, it's about the lifestyle changes as a whole. The problem is that people are drawn to ignore the picture as a whole and focus on certain foods and food groups and paint them as good or bad. Let us take olive oil for example. A study found that a village of people in Crete who took in 40% of their daily calories in form of olive oil and yet had the worldwide lowest heart disease rate together with the Japanese. But it's not necessarily the unsaturated fat in the oil that makes it so healthy. Most of the oil is made out of olein acid as well as palmitin acids and linoleum fatty acids, plus more than 100 other components. It is not easy to find out what part of the olive oil is the key to its benefits. Also, there's a difference in quality going from high quality, the extra virgin olive oil, to the regular olive oil that probably has no extra health benefits. A fact is, South Europeans have a lower rate of heart disease and strokes compared to North Europeans and Americans, and that is mostly because of their diets. The so-called Mediterranean diet consists of whole grains, a lot of vegetables, nuts and fruits, plus a lot of fat, most of it coming from olive oil, fish, yogurt and cheese. Only a little bit of red meat, but almost no processed meat and moderate alcohol consumption. A study showed that people who followed a Mediterranean diet had a 30% lesser rate of heart disease and strokes and better cholesterol rates than the counterpart group that followed a fat-reduced diet. The subgroup of the Mediterranean diet group that consumed their fat in form of olive oil instead of nuts had an even better result and lost more weight and belly circumference. Olive oil is a very good source of fat, and it should show you that fat is not always bad, except when we come to trans fats. The probably most dangerous sort of nutrients are the ones that do not appear on labels. Mr. Spector's favorite example is Chinese gutter oil, and since it's truly disgusting, I will tell you about it too. 10% of Chinese people consume this sort of oil. It is sucked out of sewages, then filtered to get out the big nasty chunks, and is then rehashed in some backyard sheds and sold to the broad public. This oil is highly cancerous and increases the risk of cardiovascular diseases. This business was banned in the US in 2009 when consumers complained about the weird taste of Chinese milk. But it's not only China. England marketed a plant-based frying oil very successfully as an alternative for butter. What the public didn't know was that the fat molecules only stayed together because they were chemically altered. Hydrogenated fats were born. A whole generation was raised with this healthy margarine until in the 1980s first reports about the hazardous effects surfaced. Only 1 to 2% of consumed trans fats increase blood fat dramatically. The risk of heart disease triples, and that does not even include the risk of cancer. After a class action in 2003 against Nabisco, the producer of Oreos became trans fat free. 2015, the US limited the consumption of trans fats to 4%, whereas the EU is missing any sort of regulation. Interesting is that also the bacteria in our guts can produce a tiny amount of trans fats and are also capable of dealing with small amounts of trans fats consumed. So the one or other cheat meal may be counteracted with some real cheese or yogurt as a probiotic, speaking of your gut bacteria health and not calories, of course. Part of the reason why trans fats are so dangerous is because as artificial fatty acids, they can confuse the communication between our microbiome, our immune system, and metabolism, and therefore disturb the metabolic process. Too much junk food is not good for your health. Everybody knows that. But a factor we pay less attention to is the lack of diversity in our diets. Fast food culture replaced dinner around the table with our families and makes up at least one meal a day for 33% of Americans. That is no wonder, since prices for fast food dropped relatively thanks to generous government grants, and so eating out is cheaper than cooking at home. In order to expand businesses, food had to become durable. And shortly it was discovered that sugar, fat, and salt cured food. The example used is a man who found a 14-year-old Big Mac in his pocket that looked like he just bought it except for the dried out pickle. But it not only made food durable, but also was popular among the customers. In high-tech labs, the food industry found the bliss point, the perfect ratio of sugar, fat, and salt. An experiment with rats showed that this kind of foods can alter brain functions in a way that the effect of eating those foods becomes addicting, comparable to being addicted to cocaine. But it did not only make the rats addicted, but it also made their neurotransmitters immune to dopamine, so that they needed more and more of the junk food to maintain their dopamine levels. Mr. Spector asked his son Tom to try out the Super Size Me diet and only eat McDonald's for 10 days. Tom loved this idea and was ready to go. After 3 days of liking the food, he became more and more tired, suffered from sweat outbreaks, and became less and less productive. Mr. Spector studied his son's microbiome after the diet and found out that the rate of the good bacteria declined from 70 to 38%, and the harmful bacteria rate increased from 25 to 58%. The diversity of the gut bacteria changed in a matter of days. That shows that our habits can change our microbiome in our guts very quickly, and as a result, this new inhabitants produce different waste materials that can affect our metabolism. However, since the microorganisms are so flexible, this effect is reversible with a good and diverse diet. Multiple studies with sterile mice showed that if they were injected the bacteria breeds found in the guts of obese humans, they became very fat very quickly and their inflammation score was high. They were mixed with mice that were injected the bacteria spectrum from a slim human. Mice are known to eat their feces, and after a while and a few pebbles later, the fat mice that ate the slim mice feces lost the weight and seemed to be immune against obesity and inflammation. That shows that microorganisms are capable of causing obesity like it's just another infection. Even though our calorie consumption did not increase in the last 40 years, our income did, and therefore our meat and oil consumption increased as well. We are witnessing an interesting phenomenon of mal and supernutrition at the same time. People become fatter, but they also suffer from nutrient deficiency. Highly processed food lacks nutrients and fiber, and therefore signals the body to eat more in order to take the missing nutrients in. A vicious cycle. But what makes us crave these foods in the first place? Probably our microbiomes again. As already mentioned, our microorganisms are responsible for producing neurotransmitters which affect our mood, anxiety, and stress levels. Every microorganism prefers a different kind of nutrition and seeks to maintain its dietary niche. That includes signaling us that they want more of a certain food. This sort of communication was actually proven in mice. We know that trans fats and fats in highly processed foods are not good for us, whereas saturated and unsaturated fats that contain a large amount of further components nourish our microorganisms and keep us healthy. Don't be fooled by the 0% fat label and view it as indication for processed food instead of your health. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video and you are ready for another cheat day and part 3 of this series. I love you so much, guys. See you in the next one. Bye bye.